Okay, it is 9:01. We'll let people in.
Good morning, buenos días. This is a bilingual message and it will be repeated in English. Este es un mensaje bilingüe y será repetido en inglés. Buenos días, mi nombre es Jessica y el día de hoy estoy aquí con mi colega Ellis. Acompañamos a The Partnership for Excellence con el propósito de honorar voces diversas y crear un espacio multilingüe. Proveemos interpretación simultánea para facilitar el acceso lingüístico a través de la inclusión. Si usted es bilingüe, no tiene que presionar nada. Si usted no es bilingüe en inglés y español, tendrá que elegir el idioma en el que desea escuchar la reunión. Si está usando una computadora, verá un icono en forma de globo en la parte inferior derecha de su pantalla que dice Interpretación. Haga clic ahí y seleccione Español. Si está usando la aplicación de Zoom en una tableta, teléfono o dispositivo similar, busque el menú de 3 puntos en la parte superior derecha de su pantalla. Haga clic en Interpretación de idiomas, elige Español y después Done o Finalizar. Les recordamos a los oradores que hablen uno a la vez y a un paso moderado. Muchas gracias. Good morning. My name is Jessica, and I am here with my colleague Ellis. We're joining the Partnership for Excellence team today in an effort to honor diverse voices and create equitable, multilingual spaces. We provide simultaneous interpretation to facilitate language access through inclusion. If you are bilingual, you do not have to press anything. If you're not bilingual in English and Spanish, you will have to select the language that you wish to hear the interpretation in. If you're on a PC or laptop, look for the globe icon on the bottom right that says interpretation and select English. If you're on a Zoom application on an iPad, phone, or similar device, look at the three-dot menu on the right. Click on language interpretation and select English and done. We like to remind our speakers to please speak one at a time and at a moderate pace. Thank you. You may assign me now.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Partnership for Excellence. I'd like to introduce the chair of the Foundation Roundtable and our generous sponsors, John Clark of the Bauer Foundation. John?
Thank you, Judy, and good morning to everyone out there. It's my great pleasure to welcome you to this virtual Partnership for Excellence conference. As Judy said, I'm John Clark. I'm the president of the James Bauer Foundation and the current chair of the Foundation Roundtable. And I'd like to add that I really look forward to seeing all of you in person at the PFE in spring 2023, something to look forward to. So now in its 28th year, which is hard to imagine, of convening the Santa Barbara County nonprofits and foundations, this event has been continuously sponsored by the Foundation Roundtable. So you will see our sponsors up on the screen, and a big thank you to all of them. So the Foundation Roundtable is over 35 local funders, private foundations, and community foundations and others. And we serve our community mostly through our funding partnerships with all of you. So I want to also express gratitude to all of you for those partnerships that we have with you, and more importantly, for just the skills and the passion that you bring to addressing the most important issues in our community, of course, of which today's topic is one of those. And also, in terms of today, we have some great partners that are helping make this event happen. And so I'd like to thank all of them. You can see with the new screen our partners. And special thanks particularly for our featured speakers and researchers who have put so much time into creating the content that we will all be talking about. And also 20 generous facilitators who will be supporting the really important conversations that you all will be having over the course of the day. So thank you to all of those people that really made today's event happen. And lastly, on somewhat perhaps more of a personal note, I want to offer special gratitude to our friend Joni Meisel, who has been the glue that has held the Foundation Roundtable together for, well, about 20 years now. We as a roundtable first met Joni actually when she was a volunteer for the PFE conference in one of its very first years. And since then, she has been with grace and patience helping the roundtable do its work. And I know that if you contacted the roundtable over the last 2 decades, you talked with Joni. So Joni, after giving us so much time and effort, has announced that she plans to retire next year. So if this were in person, I would be asking you to give her a round of applause. But since it's not, I hope that when you see Joni out in the community or at next PFE, you are willing to thank her for what she has done for the community. And I know we at the Roundtable will miss her, but our loss may be somebody else's gain. We will be looking to bring in someone to follow in Joni's shoes. So if you or someone you know might be interested in that work, keep an eye on NPRN in the next couple of days, and the job description will be floated. So with all of that, I want to also give thanks to Judy and her team and hand the mic over to her for the rest of the day. And on behalf of the Foundation Roundtable, I hope you enjoy the program. Thank you.
John, thank you so much. And again, thanks to our sponsors. We are here in Zoom. Welcome to the Hotel Zoom. Many of you have stayed here before. Welcome back. Some of you may be more familiar with some other platforms, so we welcome you and we'll guide you through the day. On Zoom, you have access to your microphone and your video, and we invite you to come on camera today so that we can see one another and create a sense of community. On Zoom, you also have access to interruptions, so please remain on mute until our community conversations. Thank you. You can use the chat for tech support and for comments, and our team is online, on hand. They're extremely responsive, so please feel free to post in the chat. We are recording today the presentations and panel to share on the Nonprofit Resource Network on NPRN. The breakout sessions will not be recorded. And as Jessica said, to help facilitate interpretation, please, when you're speaking, speak clearly and at a moderate pace. Pauses and breaths will serve us all today. So we'd love to see a little bit about who's here today. So in the chat, would you post what city or neighborhood that you're joining us from today? Where are you all in your places and spaces? In our garage, on campus, downtown, Goleta, Nolita, Santa Barbara, Santa Maria, Carpinteria, Thousand Oaks, zooming in from a hometown that I missed, in the Chumash land. Wonderful. Welcome, welcome everyone from everywhere that you are into this community. I'm going to share a little about overview of today's schedule. So throughout the morning, you're going to meet our vibrant speakers. We appreciate their incredible contributions and collaborations for the Partnership for Excellence. In particular, Kathleen Knight and Gary Clark, who really helped give shape to today's vision and rallied more experts to the stage. So to learn more about our speakers, please see the speaker bios on the Partnership for Excellence webpage. Today's program is in 5 sessions, and we're featuring leadership from the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative, from the Fund for Santa Barbara, from the Santa Barbara Foundation, from Evolving Equity, the State of the Nonprofit Sector, and the UCSB Center for Evaluation and Assessment. So we'll begin with an introduction and 2 presentations. Then we'll have a short audience break at 10:10, and you'll be back after a break for a conversation panel, followed by facilitated community conversation breakouts, and then a large group community discussion and reflection. And you'll hear more about those conversations as we move through the day. We'll conclude at 12:30 this afternoon at 12:30. So a little bit about today's theme: activating equity in the Central Coast. It's a bold theme, isn't it? What do we mean today by activating equity here at PFE? So we mean to build on our understanding of the principles of equity, to deepen our awareness of disparities, and engage communication for our sector. Activating expresses being in action. We're in a process of progress, and that includes the Partnership for Excellence. We are stretching and discovering and taking action with you. So today's program is guided by 2 independent studies in partnership with experienced university research teams and focused in the Central Coast. These community investments, these studies, are ongoing resources available to strengthen our community and measure our progress around equity and move us forward. So yes, aspects of today's shared data from our region might be hard to hear. So what might come up today? Emotions, disbelief, lived experiences, discomfort. These are real and part of stepping into information and awareness. What else might come up? Excitement for change, ideas, confirmation, new perspectives. So how might we hold all these together with our PFE spirit of curiosity and connection for our sector? Whether your organization is deeply rooted in promoting equity or beginning a journey of learning and accountability, wherever you are, start from here. We thank you as we received your questions, your barriers, your equity interest during the registration process. And we really endeavored, informed by you, to thoughtfully design this program with the hopes of providing some answers and some information for you. So after the presentations and panel this morning, if you have insights and emerging questions, and we know you will, bring these to your community conversation breakouts. We will not be hosting Q&A after each presentation, so don't miss these discussion spaces to reflect and learn from one another. And yep, today's program is expected to raise more questions than answers for all of us. A vision for an equitable program, an equitable region, is greater than you and me. It's greater than our organizations and foundations. And here we are, activating, creating actions again and again and again over time, for a long time, toward this regional vision. So we sincerely hope that you'll come away today feeling empowered and energized, ready to advance equity in the spirit of your organization's mission and our community. So welcome, and let's begin our program by welcoming Rubai Estes, Vice President of Programs at the Santa Barbara Foundation. Welcome, Rubai.
Thank you. Thank you, Judy. For all the reasons Judy mentioned today, I've chosen to read. So thank you for the opportunity to be a part of Partnership for Excellence and speak to a practice that is at the core of our work at Santa Barbara Foundation. Continuous learning to inform our work and how we engage in the community. This can come in the form of identifying trends from a series of conversations, grants processes, traditional research, and in most cases, all three to make sure we got it right. In the recent years, amidst the public health crises, researchers across the world conducted what's known as rapid assessments, so that community-based organizations, government, and philanthropy could invest in critical needs effectively, but also with a sense of urgency. Without these assessments, increase in violence in the home, lack of access to resources for people with disabilities, and gendered impacts of COVID-19 would not have surfaced to the consciousness of countries until it was too late. These are the invisible crises within a pandemic. Alongside, we know we must understand the many different drivers that lead to crisis for our families and the intersectionality of these issues. This means housing, healthcare, counseling, childcare, workforce development, all must have a part in interventions to climb out of systemic and intergenerational poverty. It is important to get the whole picture of our communities and an understanding of what we are doing collectively, and to find those underlying barriers where inequity flourishes. So we move together from symptomatic care to systemic change. There is no single solution to a social issue. Research creates that most extraordinary platform formed by confluent, simultaneous community voices, arguing with each other with just cause, bringing forward the many realities so we can derive the many ways we might treat the human condition. But what is our capacity to do so? I would say immense. I take a look at you, our peers, our partners, those you care for, and often the same as those who inspire you. In the end, we innately use research and findings in our day-to-day work, but we want culturally responsive and equitable evaluation embedded to advance equity. The State of the Nonprofit Sector report provides the most up-to-date and holistic picture of our county's nonprofit sector. The data reveals insights which guides funders, practitioners, government agencies in collaborating towards opening, rebuilding, and building resilience. The regional equity study deepens our understanding of regional disparities and focuses on advancing social, health, environmental, and economic equity. The research gives us a common language and a common understanding, which in turn will inform what steps we need to take at different levels, different capacities to advance equity in and through our work. So we hope that the discussions today offer a few things. It offers a deeper appreciation of what qualitative and quantitative research can contribute, validates the wide-ranging experiences in our communities, gives a rich contextual insight into people's lived experiences as a result of policies, programs, and power dynamics. And lastly, offers knowledge that informs meaningful steps we need to take across sectors to address them. Thank you for being present. We ask for your openness and commitment to digging deeper into the data to fully address inequity in the Central Coast of California. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, everyone. My name is Tariq Azam. I am just really grateful to be joining you here today. I'm director for the Center of Evaluation Assessment here at UCSB. And today I'm going to be sharing with you some insights gained from the State of the Nonprofit Leader Survey. One of the things I did want to first, before we get started, is I did want to acknowledge Stacy and Gary and Ubai for the opportunity to collaborate on the survey. And I also want to acknowledge Nally Jones, who's the Associate Director of the Center, who also took a large part and lead on this actual instrument. And then finally, I also wanted to say thank you for those that took the time, energy, and effort to respond to the various questions that were posed. We fully recognize that this is, everyone's busy, there's a lot of things going on. And we're just deeply grateful that you took the time and effort to actually respond to the various survey items. And because it really helps to contribute to broadening the conversation and supporting broader understanding about what's happening in the nonprofit sector. So I'm going to just share my screen in a second, but I do want to say a couple of things before I do so. The way I like to kind of present information is I tend to kind of tell stories as part of the process, and I try and point out patterns. And one of the things I do appreciate is if people have reactions or questions to it. I usually have the chat menu open. I don't know if I may not be able to respond to everything that comes up, but I do like the opportunity to respond if it is possible to do so. I'm unable to remain the rest of the day because I'm actually teaching a class right after this presentation. And so this is like the only opportunity to engage with you all. And so if you feel like responding to something or saying something, please use the chat for that. And I'll try and keep an eye out on that and respond to that. So I just wanted to first of all, just say that. So we'll get started. That's okay. And let me bring up the chat menu. Okay, thank you. Perfect. Okay, that sounds good. So I always like to start this by telling a story. And this story had to do with the theme of today. When I was early in my career, I was involved in working with various UN agencies, specifically UNICEF. And at the time, I was literally out of graduate school. And up to that point, I've been trained primarily in quantitative data, looking at means, averages, standard deviations, and things like that. And then I had the opportunity to present or be present at a presentation by an individual. His name is Marco Sigoni. And he introduced this issue of equity in research and why it's important for us to have an equity lens when we actually are conducting research. And at the time I thought, well, okay, yeah, I mean, if you're doing good research, you're gonna have, you're gonna look at different groupings and so on and so forth anyway. But he illustrated this point by providing a great example. And I'm gonna try and, I couldn't find the actual slides that he presented, so I'm gonna give you an approximation of what he did. So he started off by telling us that this is an approximation. This is not the exact slides. His outcome was actually infant mortality rates. But in this case, this is actually based on approximately real data. And we basically are often presented with simplified versions of what's happening in the world, which is, in this example, this is the share population that has received at least one dose of the COVID vaccine. And as you can see from this visual, it seems like things are going really well. That overall, there's progress towards achieving a high access to the COVID vaccine as part of this process. And oftentimes in a lot of research, the conversation kind of stops there. Like, yeah, we're doing good. We're moving towards that progress. And so when Marco showed this, again, with infant mortality, he showed that, okay, new investments were being conducted in emerging countries and emerging economies, and that infant mortality rates were actually going down. And that was viewed as a huge positive success for a lot of these policies. However, after showing a slide similar to this, he showed the following slide, which is, it shows the actual dose, like in this case, it shows the number of percent of people that have received at least one dose, but looking at it by income. And as you can obviously see here, what we find here is that there are huge disparities between high income countries in terms of the percent of the population that has received a single dose versus low income countries. And it's, I mean, doesn't even break 10% in this particular case. And he did the same thing as it relates to infant mortality, where he was able to really show this idea of how there are different ways that these interventions are manifesting themselves and the outcomes that they're having. He broke up the actual data that was presented by various ethnic groups within specific countries, by their level of education, by gender, in order to focus on issues around gender equity. And the point that he was trying to make here is there's a common phrase in or a common theme that sometimes emerges when in research and evaluation, which is, if you do good research, you're going to look at this anyway. That this isn't something that has to be necessarily focused, because any good research will actually embed this kind of analysis in it. And his argument was basically saying, no, that's not necessarily the case. Even with good research, given time limitations, resource limitations, the things that you have to focus on, there's so many different things that you can look at. that if you don't purposely take on this equity perspective and equity lens, then there's a high likelihood that you're going to miss these inequitable patterns. And a big part of that was really trying to illustrate how this is something that just doesn't happen by itself, but it's something that has to be focused on, especially when using equity and when using research to guide decision-making in the decision-making process. And I bring this up because a lot of my work is related to evaluation. And over time, this insight really helped to guide the type of perspective that I take, the type of questions that are asked, and also the type of analysis that's conducted to really highlight and leverage this equity aspect of it, because it can be ignored if it's not a focus area as part of the broader work. And so that's why I was really excited when I had the opportunity to collaborate with the Santa Barbara Foundation on this State of the Nonprofit Survey. And one of the things about it was that it was attempting to really capture various topics that were potentially very relevant, that are very relevant to the nonprofit sector, but also to foundations, funders, and other organizations. And the topics, as you can see, we looked at organizational demographics, employment in terms of staffing, retention, burnout. This was really relevant, especially during the last 2 years. The volunteering, who are the staffing level of engagement, what recruitment efforts look like, efforts towards diversity, equity, inclusion, and access within the broader domain, what demand for service looks like, what are the various economic trends or issues that are emerging, of course, the big question around fundraising and what was happening around that, current organizational capacity, anticipated organizational capacity, and the things related to adaptation and innovation that emerge. And yes, I can send the slides, Sarah. See, I am checking the chat. And one of the exciting things around this survey was that it took an equity lens perspective throughout all this process. And we looked at how DEI, DEAI issues were manifesting within the nonprofit sector. We looked at the inequities that the nonprofit sector was experiencing in terms of funding and access and staffing, and how resources were allocated across various demographic and geographic regions as part of this process. And again, the goal of this, and I want to reiterate Rubai's comments, was that really this is meant to inform both the funders in terms of how resources should be considered, allocated, and spent, but also the nonprofits as they continue to plan for the future and also advocate for various elements and various related to change. So I wanted to kind of give you a perspective around that. Now, at this point, we haven't completed the full analysis. We shut the survey down about, I think, 2 weeks ago. And so we're currently in the process of kind of completing all the analysis. And what I just wanted to highlight was some of the interesting findings around it. Our plan in collaboration with others is to present this in the spring during the in-person version of this conference. So that way, hopefully we'll have a little bit more interaction, conversation around the data and what it means. But what I wanted to do today was just present a snippet of some of the findings that are emerging that I think would be potentially relevant for us to know about. So here's one of the first ones, which is the perspectives that nonprofits had on this is their level of satisfaction with their willingness to discuss DEAI issues. And as you can tell from this graphic, I hope you can tell, is that a majority definitely felt that this was an issue that was being discussed, that this was an issue that was present, that there were conversations around it, and it was something that was not necessarily pushed out of the way and not a main focus. This was something that appeared central to a lot of the conversations that were happening. And I thought this was a really encouraging perspective on it. And it's something that, again, to kind of support the work that's going on. And then the next question is, really now we are talking about these broader conversations around DEIA. And now the next question was related to the ability to implement DEI increasing practices. And this is something that was really, you can kind of see kind of somewhat of a differential there. So we have a lot of good conversations happening about DEIA. And then in terms of the actual implementation of how do we translate these conversations into actual practices and what would that look like, there's a little bit less degree of satisfaction within the nonprofit sector. I'm going to show you a slide that contrasts them and kind of makes this point a little bit more clear. So again, the blue represents the willingness to discuss, and the green represents ability to implement practices. And this is why we want to do focus groups. It's really hard from a research perspective to understand why. Quantitative data does a great job of telling us what is happening. It doesn't do a very good job of telling us why it's happening, or what are the numbers, how do they reflect the lived experiences of different individuals and different organizations. And so part of this effort is we actually will be conducting focus groups with a sample of nonprofits to really look through this and really try and understand the factors that lead to this discrepancy between, I mean, we have guesses, of course, but really hearing from the nonprofit sector around the why factor to really help inform our practice. I see a comment from Jessica. Can you share a bit about who was being surveyed here? The target were nonprofits throughout Santa Barbara who are in leadership positions. Those were the primary respondents to the survey. And we tried to really focus on the leadership piece so that it's comparable to previous years from last year, but also to kind of give us that broader perspective on what's happening within the organization. I hope that helps answer your question, Jessica. But what I'm trying to do, what I'm trying to share with you here is that we're really trying to better understand what's happening. And again, if through the, at least through the quantitative data, we're getting a sense of this discrepancy, and then through the qualitative data, we'll hopefully be able to understand why, and that may also lead to decision-making around how to support ongoing efforts or how to address ongoing barriers throughout the system. Thank you. Okay. And am I, just for the translators, am I talking too fast? I'm trying to be really conscious of that. Okay. I can slow it down. Okay. Pace is good. Okay. I'll slow it down. The next question we asked was actions nonprofits have taken to promote diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. And this was really interesting because this question asked about what are you currently doing or have done in the past? What do you plan to do in the future? And then what are things that you're not necessarily planning to do? And so what I wanted to highlight were the different elements that emerged there. So what we see here, is we see a large focus on increasing diversity at the leadership level. So if you look at the first line here, it says implemented practices to increase the diversity of board member. And 72% of the nonprofits that responded said that that was something that they have purposefully done and attempted to focus on as part of the process. And then there are other activities. Some are focused on the actual staffing, implemented practice to increase diversity of job candidates. Some focused on implementation in terms of how the services were being implemented or delivered to the various stakeholders. So they integrated an equity-oriented approach into program delivery. And then others sought community input to better understand the needs. So there was a needs assessment, and then provide specialized training to staff on DEI. And again, that goes hand in hand with implementing practices to increase diversity. And then the one that also emerged was provide specialized training for board members on DEI. And I found this to be a really interesting result here. And again, one of the things we're really interested in is, well, potentially why isn't there more, and what are the potential barriers there? Because you have a focus on increasing the diversity of board members here, and then you have kind of a less of focus on actually working with the current board members around these issues. And so that's something, that's a potential question that's worth investigating and worth looking at. And so in terms of the no's, these are, again, some of the things that emerged. And again, the pattern here is related to specialized training on board members, where there really wasn't anything planned specifically around it. And that could be, again, an area of focus as part of it, as part of our broader conversations. And then, again, there are definitely plans to do that. So 36% did indicate that that is something that they do plan on doing. But overall, again, one of the big things that we want to do the focus groups on is to really understand, why these focus areas, why the potential barriers, why the hesitation around certain elements, and why there's a lot of attention towards different domains. And so, again, this is partly why we're doing this survey, to really provide insights for both the nonprofit sector and for funders to really understand this dynamic that's emerging. And thank you, Gary, for responding to that. Okay, other insights. So we did have some open-ended responses that provided the opportunity for the various participants to share kind of their insights. And an encouraging thing that kind of goes along with the previous slide is that at least 36% of the nonprofits indicated that DEI training was one of their top organizational capacity building needs during the upcoming year. And so there was this really broad interest in incorporating capacity building efforts that help to support DEI within the organizations. And I thought that was a really positive and encouraging trend overall. We also found that this was, again, some of the comments that emerged, and one of the insights that were delivered was that many nonprofits are venturing into innovative and sustainable models such as social entrepreneurship. And one of the big things around that is that there seems to be a broader recognition around this idea of systems thinking. And I know that's a term that has a lot of meanings and a lot of elements associated with it. But it was really encouraging to kind of see this being a potential focus. What's more, there's a growing balance in both direct services and wraparound upstream advocacy and lobbying to address broken systems themselves. The reason why I highlight this quote is because there's a movement in broadly speaking that attempts to look at not just direct services to individuals or groups or organizations on the ground, but also look at the systems in which they operate in. And this is an opportunity to really leverage the equity lens, leverage the equity perspective as part of the yes. And this is a quote, Shakira. From some of the nonprofit leaders, and this emerged more than once. So I'm just representing I'm presenting a representative quote of that. The reason why I'm highlighting this here is because focusing on systems and focusing on systems of change is a different process than direct service delivery. That process generally takes more time. It generally requires a lot more collaboration, and it also often requires understanding the community in a less siloed way. That's one way to put it, where you're able to identify what are called leverage points, barriers, but not only try and solve it yourself, but create a coalition around addressing that issue. And this is something that I think is worth tracking and understanding and asking about, like, how is this happening? What are examples of that occurring, both outside of Santa Barbara County that we can potentially adopt and learn from here in Santa Barbara, or within Santa Barbara County to really help to support the ongoing effort. I guess the reason why I love this quote is because it's really trying to highlight the fact that a single organization can't do everything, that it really has to be this collaborative effort and the systems perspective that's associated with it. And again, that's something we're going to be hopefully delving deeper into in both our data analysis and in broader conversations. And then one of the other quotes is that, again, I don't think anyone's going to be surprised by this quote, but the observations that was also made as it relates to equity is that North County has substantially fewer nonprofits and grantors per capita than South County. And basically with the assumption that North County has a higher level of poverty and more ethnic diversity embedded in it. I don't think anyone here was necessarily surprised by that quote or by that observation. And one of the things that we were really interested in our own study was to kind of show how that's happening. And for those that completed the survey, you saw the map, and I'm going to just share the map in a second. And so what we did is we actually asked people, this is the nonprofit leaders, the following question. And the question was, use the map to indicate in which physical location your organization provides services. And they can select more than one location. So they can select up to 10 if they're providing in 10 different locations. And one of the things I kind of want to see the chat is take a second. I'm going to give you like 30 seconds and look at it and tell me your reactions and interpretations to this map. Oh, I should explain what it means. Sorry. So the red areas means that there's a high concentration in a particular area. Okay. The greenish areas, I don't know how it looks on your screen, but the lighter greenish yellowish areas means less concentration of services being provided. Okay. Yeah, Whitney, not, I like, there's an expression I sometimes hear, which is not shocking, but not surprising. And it's so what's happening here, again, we're looking at this and the purple means light touch, Lynn. Yeah. So this is, again, one of the reasons why we do this survey. One of the truisms and again, based on the observations that are presented, you can kind of see that most of the services are really, at least where they're delivered physically, is definitely in Santa Barbara, Goleta, and Carpinteria areas. There's a good concentration of services being delivered in Santa Maria, and then relatively speaking, Lompoc, Los Alamos, not a lot of attention. Relatively speaking, in terms of what's happening. Same thing with Buellton and Solvang, and then Kumaya Valley, relatively little as part of it. And again, I know there's issues of money and population and concentration, and all those things associated with it. But the big thing that we're trying to highlight here is, okay, how can we better understand what's happening and potentially identify ways to kind of be more equitable in terms of the distribution of resources. Now, the one thing I do want to also mention is that a big part of this effort is really looking at and focusing on, there's a truism in evaluation in my field, which is what gets measured gets done. And so a big part of this process is for us to really try and continue this study and to continue this effort to really help us understand what's happening and to track that and hopefully provide that information back to you as a nonprofit and to also the funders to really help inform strategic decisions in the future. And then finally, I just wanted to say, I know I'm out of time. I have 1 more minute left. That we're currently in the process of the data analysis. We're going to conduct what's called an IRS 99 data analysis, which looks at the financials of it. We're going to then recruit representatives from the nonprofit sector to help us make sense of the data and to actually share that as part of the report. And as I mentioned, at the end of this process, we do plan to synthesize and summarize everything and then present it in a more comprehensive manner sometime during the in-person iteration of in spring 2023. So again, I just wanted to say thank you. I really appreciate you. Thank you for listening to me. And I really look forward to hopefully meeting some of you in person, interacting with you in the future. And I hope that this was at least some helpful information for you to for reflection purposes.
Tarek, thank you so kindly. And we know that you delayed a class, statistics class, to be with us here this morning. So maybe
And no
some
one
of this.
complained.
No one complained.
Let's just be honest. I didn't get a single complaint. We need another hour of statistics. So.
Oh, we could have brought him right here. We had some
right.
good stats right here.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. We look forward to more information from your analysis and information. And thank you so much for raising this information for us today.
Great. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce our next session with Kathleen Knight and Marcos Vargas from the Fund for Santa Barbara. Kathleen and Marcos.
Thanks so much, Judy. And hey, everyone. So good to see so many familiar faces and also some new faces as well. It's just always nice to share space with friends.
Good morning, everybody. Good to be with you.
Great. Well, we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to go ahead and just share my screen here. And as we're doing that, my name's Kathleen Knight, pronoun she, Aya, and I'm the Capacity Building Manager with the Fund for Santa Barbara, and really looking forward to diving into the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative today.
And again, my name is Marcos Vargas, Executive Director of the Fund for Santa Barbara.
Great. All right. Can everyone see my screen all right? I used to teach third graders on Zoom, so I'd always say, give me a thumbs up. So hopefully you all can see that. So before we go ahead and just jump into the presentation today, we actually do have a few poll questions for you. Want to keep people engaged and excited in the learning that we're here to do today. So I'm not sure, do I need to stop sharing? Oh, there we go. Awesome. So there's a few questions in here. They're both in English and Spanish, but if you just want to take a moment to read through and respond, that would be amazing. Great. Looks like folks are still taking a moment to answer that, so thank you. All right, well, we'll go ahead and move into our presentation for today. So again, thanks so much everyone for being here today. Marcos and I are really excited to dive in and be in discussion about the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative, which some of you may be familiar with. We have definitely been on a roll this past year, just rolling it out to community, different engagement events. Huge shout out to the nonprofit Resource Network team for partnership in that. So before we get started on really kind of introducing the report and the framework, I'd love to take a moment just to talk to you a little bit about our regional vision of equity. So the Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative is guided by a vision of regional equity, one that acknowledges our shared history, our socioeconomic integration and interdependence, and our long and growing history of bi-county activism. Now, the report and the data from this report is drawn from Santa Barbara County and Ventura County, and we're expanding collaborative work in San Luis Obispo County. This is in the spirit of United Central Coast and in honor of the ancestral lands of the Chumash and Tataviam people. Now, this initiative has been built on actionizing the framework and data presented in a study called Towards a Just and Equitable Central Coast, which is also known as the Central Coast Regional Equity Study. This is community-based research, which took place over 2 years and sought to be multidimensional and inclusive, which was accomplished through developing research from 2 places. First being through community consultations, which was meant to inform and elevate key issue areas from a regional community perspective. And secondly, from quantitative US Census-based data analysis. Now, I think inequity is something that we can deeply feel within our region. And this report sought to highlight the intersectional nature of inequity crises by not only providing a data-driven analysis of the crises of inequity facing Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, but also to serve as a benchmark to track progress over time towards a more just and equitable future. And most importantly, to serve as an action-based initiative framework to advance a regional vision of equity within the Central Coast, which we'll discuss together a bit later. Now, in order to do this, we have to first understand where we're at. We are living in a time of unparalleled change on the Central Coast and throughout the world. The depth and extent of regional inequity has been brought to the surface by the devastating, racially disparate impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. But this inequity is rooted in structural trends, policies, and practices that have been shaping the region for decades. The two-county region faces a multidimensional crisis of inequality that weighs most heavily on working class communities of color. And there's a huge wealth of intersectional data contained in the report, which touches on a variety of issues such as the housing crisis, environmental injustice, inequality and civic participation, and healthcare, just to name a few. Now, this also tells the story of a Central Coast as a rapidly diversifying region. And inequality in our economy has taken shape amidst major transformations in its racial and ethnic demography. While Santa Barbara and Ventura counties became majority BIPOC between 2000 and 2010, increasing demographic diversity has not resulted in an equitable distribution of the region's prosperity. When considering the rising inequality over the past 40 years, the highest income earners in the region saw their real incomes grow by over 20%, while the lowest earners in the region saw their incomes shrink by nearly 20%. Put plainly, the wealthy keep getting wealthier and the poor keep getting poorer. Now, key to sustaining this are employment practices that systematically undervalue the skills and contributions of the workers who drive the agricultural, service, and tourism industries which provide the foundation of the local economy. Low-wage workers, women, and people of color have paid an exceptionally high price, bearing the brunt of these widening disparities and extreme economic inequality. BIPOC populations are disproportionately vulnerable to economic hardship, with Latinx and Native populations experiencing the highest rates of economic hardship in both counties. Intersectional issue and framing of data, which speaks to the narrative and manifestation of deep-rooted inequity within the Santa Barbara and Ventura counties, is definitely a part of the report and the data. And we encourage you to look through the resources, such as the executive summary, the full report, our website, which we'll share at the end, to leverage this data, this narrative, and this information within your own work. This is really meant to be a community resource to leverage funding, expand programming, meet your mission, and etc. Now, we never wanted this to be just another report that sits on the shelf. And so the entirety of our framing while putting together the report also centered around actionizing around this data and addressing inequity in order to transform our region towards a more just and equitable one. The Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative aims to deepen our understanding of regional disparities, facilitate a region-wide, multi-sectoral conversation, and advance social, health, environmental, and economic equity through a community and research-informed action framework. This framework is guided by a collection of principles and priorities, which speak to the need, urgency, and ability to actionize. I'll now pass it over to Marcos to guide us through this framework. Oops, Marcos, you're on mute.
Okay. Again, thank you, Kathleen, and good morning, everyone. Happy to be with you for today's Partners for Excellence, and thank you all for just being here. Let me start by saying, again, as Kathleen mentioned, this report was developed to be much more than a collection of data on inequities in our region. It's also about providing a framework to help inform a movement for equity in Ventura and Santa Barbara counties, and soon San Luis Obispo County. So while we never intended this report to be prescriptive or to promote any particular policies to address the many issues it covers, we did conclude the report with a set of 11 principles and priorities, with an idea of starting a conversation on regional equity while providing a framework and direction for what it might look like to undertake a collaborative effort to move forward a more just and equitable Central Coast region. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go through these principles and priorities rather quickly, although I'll try and slow down for the interpreters best I can. But again, please check out the full report where all these are elaborated on. Kathleen, could you start the first one? Our first principle and priority is respect the rights and experiences of the indigenous peoples of this land. In this principle, we honor knowledge, cultural traditions, and resilience that has sustained our region's first peoples, the Chumash and Tatavian people, supporting their ongoing struggle for self-determination, while also drawing from native knowledge and worldview to inform our shared stewardship of the land and our interconnectedness of all life. Number two, center equity and justice as foundational economic values. In this principle, we center equity as a sign of economic strength, where we embrace goals such as closing the racial and gender wage gaps, as well as benchmarks for economic success. Number three, invest in inclusive, universally accessible infrastructures of opportunity and social provision. It's a mouthful, but the basis of this principle is that on the Central Coast, we all have the right to such social goods as affordable housing, affordable health care, quality of education, and that they all must be made accessible to all people, regardless of income, ability, language, citizenship, or immigration status. Number four, advance racial and intersectional justice. As we all know, the transformation to a more just and equitable region requires systemic change, and therefore this must be informed by racial and intersectional justice that cuts across multiple issue areas. Number five, recognize, respect, and protect immigrant rights, civic integration, and political voice. As the report clearly points out, immigrants are an integral part of our Central Coast region and essential to our regional economy. Local governments must therefore be aware and responsive and accountable to our immigrant communities. Certainly more can be done to promote and support efforts for immigrant integration through grassroots organizing, naturalization drives, and voter registration campaigns. Number six, protect tenants, preserve communities, and make housing affordable for all. What more can I say? We're all very much aware of our region's housing crisis. And while all these issues discussed in this report are important, housing sits at the intersection of so much inequality in our region, and this is why we decided to elevate it. Number seven, be a leader in environmental and climate justice. Here we have a chance to live up to our reputation as the home of the modern environmental movement by showing the rest of the countries a path towards a more sustainable and just environment. Towards this, we have a long history of environmental activism to draw from, including more recent successful environmental justice campaigns against fossil fuel power plants, against the creation of a liquefied natural gas terminal off our coast, and to regulate the use of hazardous pesticides on commercial farms. Number eight, bridge digital divides for underserved communities. As the pandemic clearly has shown us, full and unencumbered digital access is now a basic necessity for full participation in economic, social, political, and civic life. In the report, we highlight that Latinx and Black communities are the least digitally connected, something that has only been exacerbated during the pandemic as children struggle to attend school remotely and folks try to get appointments for COVID tests and vaccinations. Number nine, create platforms for collaborative, community-engaged equity research. As you're hearing today, this report touches on a wide range of issues using a model of community-engaged research. However, as an ongoing multi-year initiative, this is really only the beginning. A much deeper dive is needed on important issues such as K-12 education and criminal justice reform, among others. Towards this end, region-wide active collaboration will be needed from our universities, community colleges, philanthropic organizations, and community-based groups. Number 10, build from our victories. And there have been many important victories in our region to learn from. Recent victories include during the pandemic for increased funding for tenants protection, services for the unhoused, and the expansion of state financial assistance to immigrant families severely impacted by COVID. All all efforts that were spearheaded by community-based organizations in our region. Number 11, open avenues to participatory democracy. This is key. This principle and priority centers around the important need to have diverse voices at the table. Change happens when communities are engaged, including actively participating in the electoral process. Organizations rooted in the region's diverse communities are needed more than ever to empower marginalized groups by activating new and occasional voters to build electoral power, to make their voices heard with lawmakers, and to build coalitions across groups, including those groups that have historically been excluded from the political process. So again, these are 11 principles and priorities. It's our hope that you all will consider drawing from them as we collectively work to advance equity in our region. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcos, for just doing such a wonderful job to really ground this conversation and frame some of the work going forward. So where do we go from here? We'd love to take a few moments to talk about moving the initiative forward and some opportunities. And before we do that, we do have another few poll questions, again, just to keep you on your toes. So we'll go ahead and take a couple of minutes just to respond to that. Again, this is available both in English and Spanish. Great, we'll go ahead, just give it another few seconds here. Awesome, thank you so much everyone for your participation. Oh, and awesome, we've got some, we're able to share it back too. So, okay, awesome. Yeah, great to see that everyone feels, well, not everyone, but a lot of people feel like cross-sector collaboration is really important. You know, I think also too, one of the ways that we can think about collaboration is in between our sector as well, right? And we have been engaging as a philanthropic community in discussions with Nonprofit Resource Network Santa Barbara, and definitely some folks who were here at the last panel discussion, as well as those community leaders who joined us as well. And all this to say that there are some really great examples of local organizations already actionizing equity and leveraging the Regional Equity Initiative framework. During this conversation in August, we heard from subsectors within the philanthropic sector, including Direct Service Organization, Women's Economic Ventures, and Irene Kelly, and their approaches to advancing economic equity. We also heard from advocacy organization Santa Barbara Tenants Union with Nadia and Stanley on their organizing work for housing equity. And also from philanthropic organization Ventura County Community Foundation and Vanessa Bechtel, and their work in democratic journalism for information equity. In our community conversations, there is an incredible reflection of the diversity within our sector, meaning the philanthropic sector, and the ways in which we all work with and for our community. And our hope today is that no matter where you are at or what you do, you can see an opportunity to engage in equity work. We all have a role to play. Some of us have just starting out, and some of us have been in the work for a long time, but we have this amazing opportunity today to come together to share ideas, ask questions, and collaborate to support one another in our Santa Barbara County community. So just to give you a little bit of an insight into where the initiative is now and how we're moving forward, we're engaging in a community-based strategic planning process with Dr. Johnny Williams of Evolve Equity, who's here today. She's absolutely amazing. And it's been a journey to get here, but we've got a roadmap. And this is from the spirit of building from our victories, a nod to priority number 10. This includes understanding where we're at and where we want to be. So far, we've launched the regional equity study and shared this with our community and been creative in how we share this. We've also built out the framework, keeping in mind a readiness for change and the power of narrative and collective action. And we also have a roadmap for where we want to be. This includes activating change champions from diverse sectors, speaking much to the intersectionality of equity. Transforming our region to a more just and equitable one will take an intersectional and innovative approach. This also includes a 3-year strategic plan. But beyond these 3 years, it's important to have recognition that this is not just microwave equity, but rather building an intentional model for change that builds and sustains long into the future. Part of this intentional, jumped ahead there. Part of this intentional model includes pillars for cross-sector collaborative change. And this was drawn from the responses of community members across 6 diverse sectors and include 4 pillars. The first being belonging, so building trusting cross-sector relationships. The second pillar includes mastery, which is acknowledgement of power and privileges. Our third pillar, interdependence, which is successful reciprocal collaboration. And our fourth pillar centers in generosity, which is sustainable resource circulation. We'll explore this framing more in depth during the panel conversation as we speak to actionizing equity, and we're excited to share more findings from the strategic planning process as it evolves. We're building this initiative together, and we all have an opportunity to engage. As we spoke to before, some of us are just starting out and some of us have been in this work for a long time, but I really think that PFE is an amazing opportunity for us to start to come together and to really work together as a community in addressing and advancing and actionizing on equity. I'm really glad to be here with you all today and looking forward to diving into our community conversations later to share space and be expansive in approaching equity. And our hope is that you leave here today feeling inspired and empowered to actionize on equity in your own work and as a community. In the spirit of reciprocity, I encourage you all to engage with myself, Marcos, our Central Coast Regional Equity Initiative team, and our community as a whole. You can find out more on the initiative's website or by calling and emailing me at the fund and staying engaged with the work that we can collectively do together. I'll just go ahead and drop my email in the chat too, but I will pass it on back over to Judy. Thanks, everyone.
Before we move on to Judy, if I could just, again, really thank Kathleen for her leadership in this project, but also for us to recognize that this work does require partnerships and collaboration. At the core of this work was a partnership between the fund, the Blum Center at UCSB, as well as the USC Equity Research Institute. Clearly, no one organization can do this alone, so we're very, very proud of our collaborative partners, including all the funders that supported this effort, many who are members of the Foundation Roundtable. So again, thank you all.
Yes, more thanks, Kathleen and Marcos, for your deep work. And wow, can you all feel it across these 2 studies, just the depth of work, community engagement, analysis that is happening in order to bring some really valuable information to all of you. We're going to go on break right now for 10 minutes. So we will reconvene at 10:23, and you'll want to come back for sure for the conversation panel where we really start to digest some of this data and look at how you might use and apply it in your work, in your organizations. And what are barriers and opportunities to be able to work in equity and to work together. So have a break, refresh your beverage, maybe get a drop of sunshine, a breath of fresh air, and we'll see you back here in 10 minutes. Welcome back, everyone. Welcome back to the Partnership for Excellence. Jessica?
Can't hear me. Can you hear me? Y'all
Yes.
hear me now? Okay, perfect. Okay, and just a quick reminder, we are doing simultaneous interpretation. So you will be able to access that through the globe icon. It will appear in just a moment on the bottom of your screen if you're on a laptop or PC. If you are on a mobile device, you can see a 3-dot menu on the top right and select language interpretation and then select English. Para aquellos que apenas se han reunido con nosotros, tenemos disponible la interpretación simultánea. En un momento verá el icono de un globo en el fondo de la pantalla. Seleccione el globo, haga clic ahí y seleccione español para poder escuchar la interpretación simultánea en español. Si está en un diapositivo móvil, podrá mirar los 3 puntos en la pantalla, en la porción superior de su pantalla. Seleccione interpretación y seleccione español y luego done para escuchar la interpretación simultánea. You may assign me now.
Thank you, Jessica, and welcome back. Also, another reminder that as we prepare for our community conversations after this panel, we will have dedicated bilingual breakout space. And if you would prefer to join a breakout with Spanish interpretation, please direct message our host, Brianne Foster, in the chat, and we'll make sure that you are assigned to your space of preference. Thank you. Now, our nonprofit sector's role in equity. Let's move into a panel conversation. We have with us here today Stacy Furia from the Santa Barbara Foundation, Marcos Vargas, back from the Fund for Santa Barbara after the last presentation, Johnny Williams with Evolve Equity and integral to the Central Coast Regional Equity Study, and this conversation guided by Lauren Trujillo with the Santa Barbara Public Library Foundation. These are all smiling, self-proclaimed data lovers who are committed to helping us explore readiness, addressing barriers, using these charts and graphs we've been seeing, and discovering ways to collaborate toward equity. So good morning and welcome. And Lauren, they're all yours.
Thank you. Welcome, everyone. I'm sure everyone is data lovers like us here around the panel and have really enjoyed all the quantitative data we've gone into. But this discussion, I hope, will give that qualitative vision overlay and kind of dive deeper into why we're here today. We want to provide opportunities and examples for actionable steps with this deep and dense data that we just went over throughout the other part of the day. And I know if you're like me, you're going to start to ask even more questions as we go into this discussion. So I encourage you, please write down your questions. The other part of the day will be in breakout sessions and we'll be leading community conversations. So please note your questions. That'll just really add depth to where we hope the conversation will go. And what we're unraveling here is really deep, and we want to make sure we structure through the conversation. So we're going to be going through conversations of readiness, conversations of actionizing the data, and conversations for opportunities for collaboration. So to open with our first question to the panelists, from a variety of starting points and stakeholders, how does our sector intentionally develop spaces to do equity work? Johnny, do you want to take a crack at this first?
Of course. Thank you, Lauren. So I'd like to open first by kind of acknowledging my expertise and my view that I'm bringing to this. So I'm a licensed psychologist, and so I have expertise in psychological behavior change of individuals, groups, and systems. And as we learned from Tarek's presentation, structural collaborative change and coalitions are really necessary to move forward regional equity. So what I'd like to share with all of you today is to understand how to do this change using a readiness model. So I'm going to share a screen of a visual that I created to really show this concept of a community readiness model. Thumbs up if you can see it. Great. So this is a community readiness model that helps us really understand where we are on this staircase of readiness for change. And it's universal to all behavior. And we can start here on the bottom of no awareness, where we're not really sure that any issue is really important to act yet. Then we go up to this denial or resistance stage. Then vague awareness, so there's might be a little bit of concern to act. And what was shared in your responses in your registration is that most of you all are in this 4, 5, and 6 stage of making equity change, where you're pre-planning, you're preparing, or you're initiating change. So I'd like to introduce this metaphor of the spiral staircase, because it might feel like we're going in circles, but we're going up and down a staircase, and just acknowledging that the change process requires us to really understand where we are at each level and how we can lead those who might be at a lower level than us, lead them up the staircase. So I invite all of you to kind of use this readiness lens to picture where you are at right now in your team or your organization, to help you identify how you might encourage others to be going up the staircase, and how you might learn from others that are a higher readiness level than you. How might you learn from them? So it's our responsibility as leaders to really understand where we are, and also expecting frustration. So I'd like to just normalize that, because frustration happens when we are at a different readiness level than someone else and we're working together. So I just want to encourage everyone to just expect this frustration, because that's where change happens. That's where healthy discomfort happens. So using this model, I'm just encouraging everyone to invite healthy discomfort as you're raising the ambivalence level of others around you who are uncertain of making change. And it's going to take persistence. It's going to take identifying maybe how values are incongruent with actions to motivate change. So that's where we as leaders that might be at a higher readiness level, we need to really confront in a healthy way those that are lower and really invite them up the staircase ladder. So I invite all of you to think about this and just ask yourself some questions about where you are with being open to healthy discomfort. So how are you leaning in to healthy discomfort? Other people might call it generative tension. How are you welcoming this discomfort daily within your work, team, or organization? How are you mindfully celebrating the learnings that result from this healthy discomfort? And so I just want to identify that we all kind of need to commit that change happens through discomfort, and expecting this frustration, and really use that as motivation to know we're in the right place and that we are making progress towards change.
Thank you, Johnny. I think building from this really amazing framework that this isn't linear and it's not going to, I love the spiral staircase imagery and how we can just understand that while we're moving forward slowly, it's still moving towards something and interpreting our readiness. So with that, building off that, how does our sector intentionally develop these spaces once we have determined our readiness? Yes, Marcos?
Yeah, and first of all, just thank you, Johnny. You can just see why Dr. Williams has been so integral to moving forward the regional equity study from a study to an actual initiative. So thank you so much, Johnny. I just want to point out again that how much this has to be a priority for all of us. And I was very encouraged to see the data from the state of the nonprofit sector on our nonprofit groups and how much they are focusing on this. But I was a little disappointed to see very few nonprofits really focusing on the DEI work in terms of training with their board of directors. This is the leadership of your organizations. And if the horrific racist language given by the Latinx members of the LA City Council is teaching us anything, is that racism and homophobia, anti-Blackness, anti-Indigenousness is not limited just to white folks. It's very real in the Latinx community and the broader BIPOC community. So it's important that we not make assumptions that we all are ready for this work. And so I just encourage you all to embrace the discomfort, but also take that initiative and make this a commitment. Also potentially look at incorporating equity into our mission statements, our vision statements, and value statements, so that it is truly grounded in the work we do. Because certainly this work requires that we have this kind of lens in order to be able to serve our communities effectively.
Yes. I wasn't sure, Stacey, if you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that we had the space to let Marcos finish. One of the things that I really want to emphasize is the importance of meeting an organization where they are. And so this is very important. I love the staircase imagery, because if you try to skip a step, you're more likely to fall, right? And so one of the things that we're doing at the foundation is really trying to focus not on everybody meeting a certain end goal at the same time, but that everybody is slowly making progress towards goals in the right, sort of moving in the right direction. So in terms of funding, we've really started to emphasize DEIA work as an important factor in getting granting, but we also want to acknowledge that different organizations are at different spots. We don't have a set spot that you have to be at in order to have to receive grant money, but we do want to see progress in that direction. And that's also longitudinal. That's over time. We want to see this progress over time. And I think that's true as you're in a nonprofit doing work. You might be further up the staircase than your organization as a whole, but try to meet your organization where they are and help get them to the point that you are, but make sure to acknowledge that that's going to potentially be a slow process. And as Tony said, maybe a slightly uncomfortable process. But if you can work with the organization, they can take those baby steps up that stairway to get to a point. I feel like making progress is better than penalizing folks for not being at an end place, right? I'd rather see people making slow progress than to just quash any attempts at progress. So that would be my main thing. The other piece that I would love to focus on here is one of the discussions about making progress is whether we're making progress internally within the organization and what the organization is inward facing with staff and that sort of thing. And then we also have the external conversation. How is the organization engaging with community members and engaging with their the population that they're serving? And those are two different questions. And sometimes they're in different, an organization can be in different places. Maybe they're actually very good at externally serving language justice, that sort of thing, but not as good internally, or vice versa. And I think that's another thing that we need to consider as we're moving towards diversity, equity, inclusion, and access, is that we need to make steps in both directions, but that those processes might not be fully aligned, but that we need to give grace to organizations to take the time they need to get to where they're going.
Thank you, Stacey. I think that really transitions great into the next type of question, recognizing first where you are, whether internally, externally, with your program work, with your fundraising, with different scales of your organization, before you can really take those next steps forward. and looking at taking action. So some organizations experience barriers and they can't skip that step because they're stuck on a step that they need to get through. So how do we overcome these barriers to actionize this data? And what are some specific steps, as we use the stair analogy, to move forward, maybe in different spaces at different times, and balancing that?
Thanks, Lauren. I first wanted to, if it's okay, kind of draw off of what Stacy had shared around different readiness levels in different areas, internally and externally. And using the readiness model, just to give some more context, this is used for, that I've used in my work in federally funded systems change initiatives, that as an evaluator where you are really required to do a readiness assessment to justify your efforts internally and externally. So I just want to give that context and how it might be useful to you all is really, first is just to be aware that, you know, you might be more ready or maybe be at a higher readiness level internally than doing external work. And that's okay, because anytime you want to make, you know, meaningful change, it takes time, and it also takes acknowledgement and appropriate steps. So we can't just expect to, you know, swirl to the top internally and externally. So I wanted to just also share that. So in terms of your question on how to actionize data, I wanted to share with all of you some of the analysis that I did of your registration questions to guide this conversation. So we asked all of you, what barriers do you perceive in advancing equity in your work? And we had 45% of you respond. And the top two barriers that were named were funding, resources, capacity, and low readiness and resistance. So what was really interesting in my analysis was that there was significant overlap between these top two barriers. So around 73% of responses that identified funding, resources, and capacity as the main barrier also identified low readiness and resistance as a barrier. So these two barriers are linked, and therefore the solutions also have to be linked, meaning we can't address the barrier of funding, resource, capacity without also addressing low readiness and resistance within our organization. So given this, there was a variety of sub-themes within this pink bar of what is the overlap between the two. And the main themes were limited capacity, old systems and resistance to change, leadership, and partnerships. And so I wanted to invite, drawing off of our strategic planning work for that Marcos and Kathleen talked about, how to overcome these barriers through cross-sector collaboration. So that's a way of both addressing each of these barriers. And as you had mentioned, Lauren, at the beginning, actionizing always starts with asking questions, because the type of question that you ask really illustrates how ready are you to solve it. So I have some questions for all of you to reflect on. So how are you naming the low readiness and resistance within your organization? How are you igniting generative tension about old systems and dialoguing about resistance to change? How are you pulling others into your problem-solving circle to problem solve limited capacity and resistance? Who are you asking these questions to? Who are you letting into the solution? how are you connecting with other leaders across sectors in new and creative ways who might be at a similar readiness level? Or how are you connecting with leaders that are at a higher level than you? And how are you being open to learn from them? And another question is, how are you cultivating safety and trust in these relationships to really listen and learn from one another? And this requires a commitment to creative solutions where horizontal, lateral connections are fostered. So I wanted to just pose some of those questions for reflection.
Thank you, Johnny. I think those are really great questions to start to look at that combination of readiness, but this combination of action and how we can take that reflection and move this forward. Marcos or Stacy, did you want to respond to the barriers question and how we can overcome those barriers and examples of how we can look deeper into the data that Johnny just shared? Oh, you're muted, Marcos.
When am I going to get used to that? So I just wanted to just elevate the fact that, again, data is powerful. If you check, when you read the regional equity report, it's very sobering and very, very powerful. Yet I want to get back to the principles and priorities. Unless you ground this important information in values and principles, it's not going to get as much traction. I really believe that one of the reasons why it was just so important to have Johnny part of our strategic action planning process, moving this initiative forward, was drawing from kind of thinking outside the box from traditional or modern forms of planning and strategic planning in particular, to actually look at that indigenous worldview and ideas such as reciprocity to the land and and giving as well as taking, and then also the concept of interconnectedness and our collective responsibility to really move to be stewards of a more just and sustainable world. I think those values are super important to have, and so I'm really excited that we're elevating the first people of this land, the Chumash, but indigenous worldview in general, to kind of have us start thinking in a different way moving forward. But also recognizing in that this is also in our enlightened self-interest to move forward equity. This is not something that just certainly a disproportionate issues of inequity, disproportionate impact, people of color and low-wage working people, essential workers, and poor folks. But it affects all of us, and it's the world that we live in. So, and we're all impacted by issues of the housing crisis and healthcare and education. There's been some incredible studies done that reflect the fact that the aging white electorate is not seeing necessarily the value of investing in education because they don't see themselves in that. So we need to start thinking collectively, what is our enlightened self-interest as a broader society and community? So again, I encourage us to also think beyond the data. How do we want to implement change and move it forward? Think about how we're grounding that in really clear principles and values.
Stacy, did you want to give some comments?
Yeah, I think there was an excellent question in the chat about how funders are responding to how funders are responding, and that actually really ties into what I wanted to say about some of addressing barriers. So like I know our foundation and many foundations are moving towards a trust-based philanthropy model. And so moving away from program-specific funding, moving more towards general operating funds, multi-year funds, things that are going to allow organizations to use the funds in ways that are sort of broader and can start to at least help address some things like inflation and wages and language justice. And the other thing is moving away from just the money, right? As funders, we give out a lot of money, but we could give all of our money to one organization and it still wouldn't be enough to address every issue. So we also need to understand other ways that we can support organizations as they're and to sort of break down some of these barriers. So a lot of organizations, ours included, are trying to do more capacity building initiatives. So things that help more nonprofits all at the same time. So you have capacity building efforts in DEIA initiatives or in evaluation initiatives or various things, policy related sessions, so you can learn how to impact and affect policy yourself, but also a lot of organizations are getting into policy and advocacy work to help make changes on a broader level. So those are some of the ways in which we as funders can help other nonprofits address the issues, and how we're also addressing some of these barriers ourselves. The other thing is, which I think will hopefully feed into the next question, is working together, right? As we said, our money is only so much. Similar, the fund has a certain amount of money, but when we work together, when we can do these collaborations, it helps make things go further. And that's true in the nonprofit sector as well, right? If everybody's fighting for the same small number of resources to do things independently, you're not going to get quite as far as if you're doing collaborative efforts to work together and not reinventing the wheel or duplicating efforts. So,
Well, thank you, Stacy. I think talking about the funder's perspective, it's definitely something we're all considering, and it helps drive some of these barrier concerns. And as you so well segued into the next question about collaboration, in terms of collaboration, how do we begin to think outside of our organization for a collaborative approach? And invest and find the most impactful collaborations or that align with this readiness and actionizing that we've already kind of dived into.
I'm going to jump in and start here if that's okay, Jenny, or did you have a slide that you wanted to share first?
I have tons of slides, so please go. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say a quick moment of one of the things that I've been seeing coming up in the chat and in some other responses ahead of the game. And one of the ways that I think collaboration is going to be essential is coming up with common language and common goals and a common understanding of what we're working towards. I think part of a big challenge that we can have is if we're all using different language to address similar issues, it gets a little confusing and it makes it harder to work towards those goals because we're speaking past each other rather than to each other. And so I think creating a very great first step for collaboration is creating common language, common goals, and common understanding. Sorry, go ahead, Johnny.
Thank you. In that same kind of spirit of creating common language, it's really important to have shared agreements for communicating. So I wanted to share with all of you the agreements that have been generated by our working group for the Strategic Action Plan for the Central Coast Regional Equity Study. And as you see, healthy discomfort is on there. But one of the barriers that we've discussed in terms of how to collaborate is really not having trust and safety to do that. And really, this is the foundation to any type of relationship. So I'm bringing this, trauma-informed relational perspective of really committing to these agreements and then having accountability for those that might not commit to them. So wanting to highlight this bottom one of accountability, where we're setting space for active dialogue, identifying unmet needs using I statements, and then we are collaboratively, oops, sorry. I think I did something, sorry about that. And then you're collaboratively problem solving how to overcome any expectations that were not being met. So really having that healthy accountability and course correcting is crucial, as well as shared language. So I wanted to highlight some other agreements, really is shared vision and commitment. So that's what you shared before, Stacy, of the need to really have the best interest of the community, truly and authentically in support of the community, rather than kind of maybe your specific individual needs, but how are you lifting and creating a shared commitment and realizing that there are more commonalities than differences. I also wanted to highlight curiosity. So really having an air of humbleness and acknowledging that we all are in constant learning, and really acknowledging where we come from in terms of biases that we hold. So this is the foundation, which is pillar 1 of our strategic action plan, and really is a foundation for the next step, which is acknowledging power and privilege, and really naming and claiming the power and privilege that we do have, and identifying how are we giving reciprocally, given our position of privilege, how are we giving that outwards? And then also, how are we receiving? Are we really open to receiving? So just some questions to kind of reflect and consider. And I wanted to thank Marcos for doing kind of that shout out of Indigenous worldview. So as some context, I'm enrolled member of the Dene Nation Twota-Jeetnee clan. So I'm bringing this perspective of reciprocity, interdependence, and this is necessary in safety and trust to really be able to share resources and have reciprocal collaboration through understanding your privilege and really having the trust and safety identified to do that. So wanted to share that.
No, thank you. I think these agreements are, again, a great actionable starting point, and looking at from readiness of evaluating your organization to understanding the barriers that are in front of you, whether internally or externally, and how you can look at that data that either you're collecting or data from outside of your community or the data we've just been presented today to better understand what that action can look like, and then tying it all together in this collaborative effort and understanding that together we can move this forward. So I'd love to hear from Marcos and Stacy on the collaborative approach here, and any case studies, examples, or pieces you can speak to on that.
Sure. First of all, again, I want to elevate what Stacy said earlier. As funders, we need to look beyond simply funding direct services, which are very important, but to also be funding community organizing and policy advocacy. And many direct service providers are actually engaging more in this space. So I really challenge us all to kind of tap into our inner organizer, community organizer, and learn. I think it would be great for all of us to be trained in community organizing. I think we had a president who was actually a community organizer, and so it's a tremendous skill. Also, I just want to say again, just elevate the fact that this work is so important and no one organization can do it alone. I think we've all realized that. But we need to actively, intentionally work on building partnerships with our sister organizations in the region, but also other organizations in our sector, maybe at the national level or state level. There's a lot of amazing work going on, and you'd be surprised how much is taking place right now, not only in our region, but outside our region. So drawing from that is very important. And then just recognizing we all have something to bring to the table, but community organizing is about relationships. And so actually doing the work of, contacting sister organizations, having one-on-one conversations with them to build that trust and the relationship to move forward a collaborative. And in terms of examples, there are so many incredible examples. The Food Action Plan, for one, as an incredible example of organizations coming together in collaboration to seeing their self-interest as organizations to move forward greater equity in terms of food access. Another one that's really incredible is the Central Coast Climate Justice Network, which is working to transform the traditional environmental movement to an environmental justice movement by engaging non-traditional organizations, Mixtec organizations, Latinx organizations, Black organizations into environmental justice issues. As we should all know that much of this environmental problems we're having disproportionately impact communities of color and poor people. So, and one last one I want to put out there, and one that the fund is very proud of. After the prior administration was elected, there was a number of attacks on the immigrant community. So we brought together a group of organizations that provide immigration legal assistance and support and defense and advocacy, and created a Central Coast Immigrant Legal Defense Collaborative. And that collaborative has significantly increased the collective capacity of organizations to defend our immigrant community and provide them legal services by sharing information, sharing funding sources, working collaboratively on grant proposals together, as well as just providing support for one another and good information. So I just encourage us all to consider the possibility of engaging in a collaborative effort with your organization and maybe some of your partner organizations.
Thank you, Marcos. So many great examples, so much great work happening in our community. Stacy, did you want to add to this at all about the collaborative approach from a funder's perspective too? Yeah.
I think my co-panelists did an excellent job. One of the things I would say is, from a funder's perspective, we also need to work together as funders to get common language and common goals. And one of the things that has come up a lot in a lot of our sort of knowledge circles and things are how to ask questions in a common way, how to have reporting that is less burdensome for our for grantees, right? So that if you have to answer the same question in 10 different ways for 10 different funders, that's kind of a pain. And so trying to find ways where we can come together as funders to collaborate to make things better for the whole of the sector. So asking common questions, so the same questions, but in the same way as well. So looking for similar information from organizations. I know a lot of organizations who fund similar groups will even talk about reporting and say, okay, if this organization is reporting to you these things, like what are you asking, so we can ask similar things so they don't have to double up. So that's one way on a funder level we can collaborate. The other thing is funding those collaborations that Marcos has already mentioned, right? So funding the engagements for them to get together. Something else that's going on a lot is one of the things that we try to work on is if we can help with grant writing and support for those organizations so that they can focus on the actual program part of the organizations and the engagement, well, we can help them raise that money. If it's not directly from us, then we can at least help leverage government dollars, leverage other larger funder dollars, those sorts of things. So those are some ways from as funders that we can support that programmatic work and the collaboration, programmatic level collaborations and policy collaborations that are happening.
Can I just add to that?
Yeah.
And thank you, Stacy, for elevating that. You know, even beyond monetary support, the need for capacity building assistance. And I know the Fund for Santa Barbara is very committed to that. Kathleen heads our capacity building program, but we also have other resources, the NPRN, Cal Lutheran Nonprofit Center. So we're not alone. We have support out there. We really need to seek it out because we're on this journey together. As was mentioned, we're at different phases in our development, but ultimately we're in this effort together. So building our internal individual capacity as well as our collective capacity is crucial. So just wanted to elevate that.
Thank you, Marcos. And, you know, I think we've barely been able to scratch the surface in the time that we've been allotted here, but I hope today you've got some key takeaways. I love Johnny's slides. We can be sure to share those. It's just great visuals to understand how can we start to wrap our arms around this work and approach it. The agreements especially really deliver this accountability opportunity. This is work we can't do alone, as Marcos so graciously said right now. We have to work together and can use this equity framework in our work wherever we are in that readiness spiral staircase. And I hope today we can enter this conversation as we go into our group breakouts and collaboration conversations to start moving forward on this work right now. So thank you to our panelists. Thank you for all you're doing in the community with this discussion and the studies, and there's definitely a vision of an equitable future here. Thank you,
Lauren.
Thanks, Lauren.
And so I will pass it back to Judy.
Thank you all. Whew, big breath. There's so much incredible information, ideas, perspectives, great questions being posed for our consideration. So thank you so much, Lauren and Stacy, Johnny and Marcos, for being in conversation with us today. And in a few minutes, you'll be invited into a small group breakout. So please stay. This is where, this is where the magic starts to happen. This is the heart of the Partnership for Excellence, connecting and sharing with your peers. Our speakers will also be distributed throughout the breakout sessions, listening for what you are bringing forward as well. So this is really your opportunity to share thoughts and ideas about what has your attention so far. What actions are you getting inspired to take? What questions are elevating for you? So you will, in small groups, be guided by a generous volunteer facilitator, one of your peers. All the conversations will consider 3 guiding questions. The questions will be the same across the groups, and those will be posted in the chat. Also, each room will have a Google Doc and hopefully a volunteer from one of you to help collect ideas and themes from your group. Notes are not necessary, but just to collect some of the thoughts that are themes that are happening in your group so that we can bring them back to the larger group discussion. And everyone will be randomly assigned. If you wish to be in a bilingual space and find yourself in a room without interpretation, just click on that red leave button in your corner to leave the breakout, and you'll come back into this main room, and you can be reassigned. Once you're in your breakout, please turn on your video and unmute so that you can participate together. Our groups will be small by intention today, 5 or 6 or 7 people per group. And just a reminder that your facilitators are not material experts, and so they are here to really help you have a conversation with each other, and to remember these tenets that our panelists just brought forward, right? That how are we welcoming some healthy discomfort in our conversations and in our organizations, and recognizing that staircase of readiness, both where we are and where might be the people and organizations around us. So I am going to invite you into your rooms. If you have questions, the tech team will be circulating through the various breakouts, and so you can post in the chat, and we will be of assistance to you as soon as we can. We will give you a couple of broadcast reminders when you have 10 minutes and 5 minutes left in your groups. And at that time, we just ask you to, pull together some of what your collective ideas are to come back to the next conversation. And we will all return to this room at 11:50 for our community conversation. So feel free to post any questions in the chat now, and then please accept the invitation to go to your individual breakout groups and join your facilitators. Enjoy your conversations. Welcome back from your small group community conversations. Had a chance just to drop into a few of yours and hear the good energy and incredible exchange of ideas. And I want to turn over this session to the fine facilitation of Gary Clark and Kathleen Knight. So would you two like to take it away for our community group conversation?
Is Kathleen back yet?
That's a fine question. Maybe not.
Let's wait till she.
Yeah, of course.
That Gary Clark always has the most coolest shirts, I gotta tell you.
Thanks, Marcos.
And we'd like to remind everyone that the interpreting function needs to be selected again. So if you can please select English from the interpretation globe in just a moment. Les queremos recordar a todos que la interpretación simultánea estará disponible. Se tiene que reelegir la opción. Entonces, por favor, si pueden buscar el icono de globo y elegir español. And if Ellis and I can be reassigned as interpreters, please.
Thank you, Jessica and Ellis.
All right, great. So we have...
Hi, Gary.
Hey, Sarah. All right, so we have Kathleen back. All right, great.
Great.
So in this portion, we're really looking forward to hearing from the breakout groups and any highlights. What lit up for you? What are you learning that encourages or surprises you? Go ahead and unmute yourself, and anybody can share.
Oh, I see Sarah's hand raised. Go ahead.
I have to share, that map is what it has been in the times coming. We really need to have that map that we had with Tarek.
Oh, the heat map?
Yeah.
Yep. That was talked about in our breakout.
Because if you didn't see that map, it really shines a light on inequity. And thank you, Marcus.
Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
Well, hi all. I'll share a few things from our breakout. I'm Ken. This is we talked first of all about how important it is in this work to come to agreement about definitions rather than just assume that people understand and have a common understanding of definitions of terms, and how critical that can be, and how often, if you don't do that, some of us have had the example where some people will just have a response to a definition, that's political, that's something else, that if you have the discussion and share your stories, you can come to a common understanding that is much more constructive to your effort for greater equity. We also talked a lot about the challenges of data and measurement, and particularly, when you're really trying to shift things in a community, it can be hard to find and track a measure that really shows if you're really moving something big that you're trying to move. And so we talked about that, and then we definitely resonated a lot with the framework, the readiness framework. And each of our organizations we saw are at a little bit of a different place on that framework, and understanding it for our organizations and how to move a step or two up on that framework. That was very useful part of our discussion. So thank you all.
And someone send me back to Rosalind Collins' group. Is there a way to get out of this? I got knocked off in the middle of taking notes.
Joni, the breakouts, I think, are closed. We're back in the general session now.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Liliana?
Hi, so Liliana Vega, University of California 4-H program. We spent a lot of time in our group talking about, a lot of our organizations have DEI groups, right? And they have DEI teams. And so But the real issue being that a lot of those DI teams really don't have the political or power or privilege to really change anything institutionally. So we spent a lot of time talking about the need to move away from just, yes, continue the staff training, but it needs to be ongoing. It can't be a one shot. We're going to fix this organization. It needs to be ongoing DI training, but really the focus needs to be on institutional change, right? How do we create institutional change? How do we make sure that the leaders who are, CEOs and directors actually have cultural humility and cultural competency and understand how to create more equitable organizations and be willing to give up some of that power, right? Because that's really where we're going to see a lot of the changes if we start actually focusing on those structural issues, the institutional issues that keep us from having equitable systems in place. Because if you're going to hire people of color to come into your organization, but you don't really have an inclusive organization, you're not going to be able to retain them. So we spent a lot of time talking about that. We did talk about that staircase model and how that's great. But, how do we work more towards going up that staircase and so that we're not in the bottom rungs? Because I think we spend a lot of time in those bottom rungs of talking about staff training and things of that nature, which are important, but we need to also be working on those other levels of the staircase.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Liliana. And I think that you just bring up a really good point as well. A lot of times that equity work, the DEI work does tend to be siloed, or, a task force tasked with, do it. But then no change, necessarily as much empowerment for change and implementation. And so I think you bring up a really good point of, what does that look like infused in the work of your organization? We touched a bit on that in the breakout group that I was in, but it's not only a reflection kind of what you're doing outside, but also internally as well. So where are there opportunities to bring that equity lens, to bring, training that you may have received, like actually into the practice of work that you're doing. So thanks for elevating that.
Whitney?
Hi, yeah, thanks. I was facilitated by Dr. Jackie Reed, who did a really great job with myself and Kathy Wertheim. We were very much interested in actions, implementations, like what does qualify as these activities, or I think implemented practices was a term that I saw regularly. And is there any connection between what these organizations are doing? I loved the data, and I think the data, as I said before, supports everything that I already knew about inequity. And at the same time, like Liliana was saying, we're living in these other parts of the staircase, and I really feel like it seemed like my friends in my group really were interested in those action items and breaking the habits. With the group that I work, we really specifically hone in on organizational habits that create power difficulties, creating inequity. And so, it was great to talk with others about learning ways to, create equitable power within all of these communities and organizations.
Great, thanks, Whitney. Casey?
Hi, thank you all. We had a wonderful conversation in our small group, and we did shift the visual metaphor a little bit from a staircase to a ramp. I talked about the role of accessibility in the DEI work, which was nice and gave us a really strong visual to work from. We were picturing the Guggenheim, right, or something like that. But I think what was really emerging for me, and this kind of echoes on what we've heard a little bit, is with that strong visual, the challenge of trying to create movement, when one is, perhaps well above on the ramp, but much, below the individuals they're trying to influence in terms of power dynamics, and the discomfort of that, the loneliness of that, the personal toll that can take in trying to do that, echoing also what, Liliana and others were saying. But in that, something that we heard in talking about tools and resources is the role of that data and shifting the conversation from what might be perceived as, you know, a staff person with a personal agenda to someone who's highlighting issues in the sector as a whole, and how that can is, you know, one piece. It certainly doesn't solve or remove those power dynamics, but it can shift the tone of the conversation a little bit to make some of that possible. So that was inspiring to me to hear about in the conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Casey. And just, I think, a really important and interesting question that you bring up too, you know, where is their personal work and where is their work within the organization? But yeah, I think looking back to that readiness framework for change, I think can be a good way to say, you know, I think Johnny's done a really amazing job of kind of laying out some of those steps, or what, you know, even asking the questions. There's so much power that comes from the questions that we ask. And yeah, really appreciate that. Lauren, I see your hand raised.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm piggybacking off of what you just shared right now. I think a huge piece of that readiness and that getting uncomfortable work is authenticity in that work too, and making sure that your organization is doing that at the readiness and level of doing it, not to just check a box, as Liliana said, but to authentically integrate that into the culture and move that forward together. So I think in terms of Whitney, I think your question too of like, how do we do this? What are some actionable things to do right now? I think understanding your readiness and understanding where you can start to implement this framework into your existing organization is one piece to do. You know, at that readiness and authenticity level, and start those conversations if that's where it needs to start. But I just wanted to reflect on what my group kind of got at too, were these systemic issues of equity that also impact the work we're trying to do internally and externally, whether that's housing, workforce pay, you know, those are issues that limit our capacity, trying to keep people employed. So if we're just trying to do that, how can we really powerfully implement some of these integral processes to changing or shifting the culture? And so just the conversation that we had about that is involving your organization collaboratively in these bigger community discussions and getting your voice at the table in terms of housing and in terms of the issues that are facing your organization outside of that internal and external. So I think there's a lot of work we can look out collaboratively to help influence those capacity limitations without burdening that load and having that be a barrier for your organization. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Johnny?
Hi, everyone. I wanted to share a little bit more about the readiness relating to all of the registrants' responses. So I didn't get the chance or time to share this out earlier, but I just wanted to share this now to kind of frame our conversation around what areas that all of you have identified in terms of excitement to take action. And this biggest one here, it's 27%, is staff recruitment and training. And so in our group, we talked about this is where the comfort is, right? Is doing training, staff recruitment, and then it's like, great, you know, we have a diverse staff, like we're done, or we've done our once-a-year training, we're done. We really were looking at this purple pie chart of institutional level and policies, and how cool would it be to have like a PFE goal and commitment that we all make together today, as how are we going to move up this 9% for the future, and how might we be ready to do these institutional level and policies changes, because you know, our readiness is different for different areas. And this kind of shows us, okay, we're comfortable doing, you know, staff recruitment and training. We're not so comfortable yet with institutional level and policies. So for me, thinking of this kind of like as a psychologist, like thinking we want to go where the pressure points are. Like we want to invite this tension, like this is where we should live, you know, this purple pie chart. And let's get really comfortable there, because that's where the change will happen, because we need to have active dialogue and collaboration and really lean in to that structural change level. So I wanted to just offer that to this group as kind of additional food for thought.
Johnny, thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's incredibly valuable for us all to see.
Yeah, and especially too thinking about, the question did ask, like, what are you most excited to do? And I think, Johnny, you really touched too on this idea of comfortability and going into those pressure points. I think in some ways, maybe it seems like staff recruitment and those internal policies can be a bit more manageable, where there's a bit more comfortability around than kind of like these institutional changes and policy changes, which I think ultimately require a lot of collaboration and not working in our silos, whether that's, within our own organizations, within our sector, or across different sectors. So thanks for sharing that.
Juan?
Thank you. I just wanted to share a little bit about our group discussion earlier today, because we started the conversation sort of about this idea of institutional structures, and I prompt the question of why are we not seeing enough change? And what sort of at the start of the presentation, what struck me the most was some of the slides that showed how we continue to see the same patterns that we've seen for decades of services being more available in certain areas in our county, services being available more to certain demographics. And it kind of shocked me to kind of see that again. And it prompted me to sort of ask, why are we seeing this continuing? What can we do to sort of make a better impact on that? So then maybe in a couple of years when we have a meeting again and we have a presentation, we'll see different results. And I think a lot of it has to do with changing these institutional structures that are created to essentially work against that work. And so I think each of us individually within organizations, we're obviously doing our best and we're doing a lot of great work. But I do think that a key to making that change kind of bigger is working together and reimagining these structures and breaking them down a little bit at a time, so that one day we could see a bigger difference and not the same continued patterns that we've seen. Thank you.
Thanks, Juan.
Yeah, thank you, Juan.
Erica?
Hi all. Let's see, I just wanted to also, on that graph that Johnny just showed, I guess just highlight also that we seem to be much less interested in prioritizing wages, and that's directly related to the fact that our sector tends to want to hire, especially our BIPOC folks, at a lower wages. So I wanted to just and that thing around us being interested in doing more trainings and doing staff recruitment, but not actually owning the fact that we're still not providing thriving wages in our sector. So I just wanted to speak that loud and clear, and let's do more on that too. Let's also commit to that going forward.
Yeah, thank you, Erica. And I think that really speaks to we've talked a lot today about the intersectionality of issues as well. And I think, yeah, you really pointed that out. How do we work on equity within hiring and within what's going on with our staff if we're not also looking at how economic equity impacts that as well. Sure. Thank you. I see Kim, your hand raised.
Hi, well, I was in with an excellent group that had a lot of ideas and a lot of comments. So one of the things that I thought was interesting is that everything was about collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. And that is how you make true change, is through collaboration. The other thing that I thought was interesting that was brought up is inequity, but also within the nonprofit world, and how so many of our nonprofits operate under the $50,000 mark with the $990, so they only fill out a postcard. And the few that are large, they have the resources to get all the funding. So what our group suggested was more peer review. Fill out applications together, go after the same grants, send these off to the other grant writers and to other organizations to say, hey, how can we improve? We have room for you. Do you want to join us? So I thought that was interesting. The other thing that we touched upon is how do we start those difficult conversations? How do we navigate between an organization's mission, their need to stay sustainable, and how do you navigate a passion about the services and what you're feeling, and to bridge that political divide? So that way the board does change. That way we can actually have policy change as well to support all of this. So that's what our group talked about. If you have any other questions, please feel free to ask them. I was blown away by their knowledge, their experiences, and what they shared. Absolutely blown away. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks for sharing, Kim.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. Sounds like y'all had a really, really powerful, really dynamic conversation. So thanks for giving us a bit of an insight into that.
Awesome.
I just also wanted to elevate in the chat. Stanley was responding to Kim and said, your point about applying for funds together reminds me of some of the values behind community-centric fundraising, which I encourage people to check out. So that's a great resource. Stanley definitely is a resource hub as well in the community here. So thanks for that. And Bethany, I see your hand raised.
It's funny, I was just thinking the same thing of Stanley. We chatted, a lot about these same topics. Thank you, Erica and Lori, for raising the power piece and also the pay, right? The money, where the money is going also shows what's important, what's valuable. And the collaboration piece is really challenging. We've talked about these conversations around how important it is to build that trust. Like it really is, the foundation is in the relationships that we have with one another. And also, I appreciate Johnny bringing the perspective of this collective, that unless we're able to put aside our own agendas, our own egos, our own biases, and really look at how we can be better together, there are solutions that are possible or that can come from people working together from different perspectives, and something new is created that wouldn't have even been considered through that process. And it can be challenging to go in it together and to really think about how these things are aligned and how we can strengthen one another rather than competing with each other. So appreciating the space, and also recognizing that we each need to individually think about what we can do and what we can bring to the table to that effort, and how we can do it together and strengthen those relationships.
Yeah, thank you, Bethany. And thanks too for acknowledging the challenge in that as we're, working on building those coalitions. I will just say, I think it's pretty neat that we can all be here together in a space like Partnership for Excellence today to start to meet one another, to start to build those trust, in our breakout groups, as we're just having this nice chat all together. So yeah, let's keep up the momentum, everyone. Thanks, Bethany.
Yeah, and I wanted to lift up Janessa's comment in the chat, and that is as far as the voice of the nonprofit leader survey was one piece, that's going to contribute to the research findings for the next iteration of the report. But as Stacy mentioned in the chat, that we will be doing focus groups to elevate additional voices. So know that is one of the next steps in the research that we're doing to hopefully get a broader cross-section of voices included in the report. Awanja, your hand's up.
Yes, and I'm going to put my video on for just a minute because when it's on, it affects my audio. So let me see if I can get it on. And if I can't, okay. I think it's on.
You're good.
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, great. Okay, yeah, our breakout session was with Rosalind Collins and Joni, and I don't see who else was there on my screen. And one was anyway, yeah, so one of the things that came up was some of the nonprofit organizations aren't able to organizationally enter or apply DEIA in their organization because of the way it's set up, but she said she would be willing to, and she has been doing it at home and personally. One of the questions that came up for me was not really a question, it was more or less an observation. And that is, how do we build within DEIA, how do we build into moving forward in that direction? The fact that there may be backlash, and I kind of raised that as related to the whole civil rights movement, which seems like another civil rights movement to me that's going on. How do we build into, as we move forward, this expectation that this will happen, and then how do we react to it? So it's not enough to just implement it and organize it. That's something that I think is important and is a struggle as well. And then the last thing for Joni, I just want to tell her how much I appreciate that staircase, because that was a real eye opener for me. And I think it's a way for all of us to kind of look at, where our organization is and where we're going and how we're going to get there. And that was the best schematic I have seen ever. So want to thank you for that, Joni. That was really great. And yeah, basically that's kind of what we covered. There are a couple of other points, and if Joni wants to comment, that would be good, and she could share additional things that we discussed.
Let's see, I took a few notes, and we had a lot of really good individual sharing because we're all from different points of view in our organizations. And I think Olanja mentioned being in a small town, we may be doing more in our, we meet a lot of people and instead of just our work, we're doing it in our home life. And organizations provide convening space, and that's often a way of helping with equity, not charging for space or charging less for nonprofits. Collaboration was a pretty big thing for some of our groups. And perhaps mentioning that large corporations sometimes say they're doing DEIA work, but maybe their staff and their board do not reflect that, so that they're a work in progress. And that was more not necessarily nonprofits. I didn't gather that. People working on, I think there are some barriers, and we certainly have mentioned them here. Our young people are 60% renters who are sometimes being evicted because somebody wants to do something else with their land, is a real barrier to our nonprofits being diverse. And really meeting people during this pandemic has been a real problem. So I think that's kind of what I gathered from our group. And we didn't all get to talk because we didn't have enough time. So we'd love to have more time in the future.
Yeah. as
Yeah,
we ran out of time.
Yeah, we knew that going into this morning, knowing that we weren't going to have enough time because this topic can generate a lot of questions and a lot of concerns. So thank you, Joni, for sharing, and Awanja. Marcos, and then I think we're going to move to a Jamboard and hopefully do a massive share out on a Jamboard.
Well, thank you, Gary. And I just love all this conversation about collaboratives. One of the things that we're looking at for the next version or the next phase is the Regional Equity Initiative. And again, this is a brilliant Johnny idea, is that we do maybe some practice briefs, she calls them, but basically they could be case studies on models of different collaborations that we can draw from, because I think that'd be really helpful. We just mentioned a few today, but to have actually provide a better understanding of how those collaboratives and why they're effective and what they've learned in the process. The other thing I just want to remind people is that we're part of a movement here, and we're not alone in this. And when you think of movements, it's about shifting the paradigm, and that doesn't happen overnight. It didn't happen with the women's movement or the civil rights movement, environmental movement. It takes decades, and again, drawing from another indigenous worldview, 7 generations. But we need to do the work now, and we need to make it a priority, and we need to be patient with it. But also a lot of impatience as well, because we do need to move the needle. But we are part of something larger here. So I'm just so happy to see everyone here, and I hope you all feel part of that movement.
Thank you so much for that, Marcos. And I think Sarah McDonald summed it up really nicely in the chat for us. She says, we are in a movement, not a moment. So thank you all for being here. Thank you all for being part of this moment, but also part of the movement. This isn't going to happen without all of us here, all of us intentional about the work, and also finding those opportunities to collaborate. So thanks so much. Gary, any last words?
No, but I think are we going to do the Jamboard thing?
Yeah, we'll
Great.
go ahead and jump into it. So for those of you who've been at capacity building events with me in the past, you'll know that I love Jamboards here. So what would be helpful, I'm going to drop this link in the chat. And actually, I'm not sure who's sharing screen. Karen, I think that was you. Are you going to demonstrate how folks can do the Jamboard, or can you give me access to do that? Oh. Okay, I'd like to share screen so I can show folks how to do it, if that's all right. I'm not sure who's sharing the screen right now. Awesome. Okay, so for those of you who are familiar with the Jamboard, you can go ahead and start working on it. But for those of you who aren't, what you'll want to do is click on this link in the chat here. Then what you'll do is that'll take you to our Jamboard link. So now I'm going to start sharing screen to show you how to fill it out. So we've got a few questions for you today. This first one, something you learned today, algo que hayas aprendido hoy, and you can answer in English or Spanish. You'll go ahead and you can click on the left side of your screen here where it says sticky note. A sticky note will pop up, something I learned today, that it is, or we'll say great to be in community. You'll click save and it'll add it to the Jamboard here. You can add another one, you can click cancel, you can move yours around. So we'll go ahead and answer this first question here. There's also a second slide if you need a little bit more space. Up at the top, using these arrows you can click through, and then we'll go ahead and just give you some time, put some music on it. We have 4 questions for you today. So after you share something that you learned, you can click through again using these arrows to talk about something that inspired you. Click through to speak to an action you'll take, and then click through for the last question, which is an equity resource to share. So I'll go ahead, stop sharing my screen. We'll put on some music and you all can take some moments to add to the Jamboard. Thanks, everyone.
How do you get back to the Jamboard?
We're going to cue that back up. We just had to do some switching between screens. So it is coming up. And while we're doing that, and as the music starts, I just want to make a couple of final announcements. Oh, look at all these ideas coming in. I'm going to wait and let you do that. Please continue to share. I'm going to drop in here with a few final thank yous as you do. What a day wrapped in a morning. Please, tomorrow you will receive a link for an online survey. We hope you'll offer your feedback on today's program, and we really take your comments to heart. We'll also be moving forward and sharing the information on these Jamboards. Also, joyfully, as John mentioned, we are aiming for an in-person program next spring, and you're invited to join us for a PFE Community Roundtable coming up on Wednesday, November 2nd at 10:30 in the morning. We're going to debrief today's program, talk about what popped up that feels important to carry into 2023, and engage your hopes and vision for that spring program. So watch for a link tomorrow with your survey about registering for that roundtable coming up in a couple of weeks. Thanks again to our generous Foundation Roundtable sponsors, to the program team, to all of our speakers and panelists, to our volunteer facilitators, and to all of you for being here with us today. Again, we hope you're coming away feeling empowered and energized and ready to advance equity in the spirit of your own mission and of our community. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.